Yes.
All right, beautiful. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I see a few new faces that we haven't seen before, so welcome if you're first joining our Claim Advantage series, and if there's anyone that has joined previously, I'm so glad you've joined for this one. Today's Acclaim Advantage webinar series is called Rethinking Employee Mental Health Support Beyond Traditional Therapy. We will leave questions for the end, but Naya and I are both agreed that if you have a burning question while we're going through the presentation, please raise your virtual hand and ask, or put it into the chat and we'll address it at each section or at the end, just depending on how it goes. So thank you very, very much for coming. I think I've told everyone here now that we are recording. So if you're not okay with your face being on screen, please go off screen. But we love seeing faces. So Amelia, thank you for joining. So like I said, today's topic is rethinking employee mental health support beyond traditional therapy. And I think this is very important because mental health, as we all know, isn't linear, right? What works for one person may not work for somebody else. And today what we're going to look at is what can happen when we broaden the support available and consider different approaches alongside traditional therapy. I always like to start every webinar with three core truths. Something that we see consistently with mental health cases is that recovery is not a one size fits all. Like I had mentioned, what might work for one doesn't work with another. So, individuals present very different barriers, different circumstances, and all very different needs. Um, Traditional therapy is incredibly important, but it may not be the only part of an individual's recovery. And that's something we're going to explore today. And lastly, that integrated approach. We talk about this all the time, but bringing the right combination of support can lead to better outcomes altogether. And these three core truths really has helped us build the ecosystem. This is really what has been the foundation of what we had built on at Acclaim. Sorry. And just to give you at a high level, or simply put, the Acclaim mental health ecosystem is looking at all supports available and bringing them together into a more coordinated approach. So it can include, the public health system, private healthcare, what's already available in an employee's benefits, and the supports available through Acclaim. So, rather than relying on one treatment pathway, we're looking at an individual, understanding their specific barriers and connecting them with the right combination of support to help them move along their recovery. And this brings us, perfectly in today's conversation because we're going to explore one of those solutions today, yoga therapy. And with that, I would love to introduce you to Naya Bajaj, who is a holistic yoga therapist. And instead of me reading your bio, Naya, I would love to just pass it along to you, for you to, introduce yourself, let us know a little bit about your history and how you came about to this practice. So please.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for the lovely invitation to be here. It's such a gift to share time and space with all of you. I found my way to yoga therapy through a lot of lived experience. As a young person, I lived with and still do live with chronic pain, though now it's very, very well managed. I also still live with an eating disorder. And in engaging with sort of, the traditional Western allopathic model of healthcare, I found that while my care providers were very lovely, they were very invested in sort of treating the one thing that they knew how to treat, as opposed to looking at me as a whole person, puzzling out how, my challenges with movement were impacting my body image, were impacting my relationship with food. And so I sort of got a pastiche of things that sort of worked, but didn't really work for me. And it was challenging to navigate, particularly as I, went through university and sort of lost all of the traditional structures that you have as a younger person and had to figure that out for myself while also running a business full time. A very, very type A high achieving human, which correlates with some of these conditions. And one of the few places where I felt really safe and comfortable in my body was on my yoga mat. And of course, true to form, high achiever was like, oh, well, I like going to yoga. I should go 3 or 4 hours a day, which is a great way to get injured, which I did multiple times. And one of my teachers very astutely said, maybe you should learn to teach this so that you can stop hurting yourself and maybe also help other people stop injuring themselves. Because we see a lot of humans like you on the mat who, show up dysregulated and become progressively more dysregulated in their journeys. And so I did a teacher training. I learned the sort of physiology and the anatomy of things. And I was very curious to go deeper and to better understand how this practice that was supporting my mental health actually did so. And so I, leveled up my 200-hour training into over 1,000 hours of training. I did an independent research project on yoga therapy for eating disorder specifically, since I was bringing my lived experience to it, but wanted to understand the research, better understand the Western medical perspective, understand the Ayurvedic perspective as well. And so in my practice, I do work with humans who live with eating disorder, but also who live with chronic pain and who, as someone who burns out once a decade, people who also experience that. So my practice is very informed not only by my lived experience, but also all of the current research from both sort of Western medicine and Eastern medicine. And it enables me to stay well as someone who, lives with fairly complex conditions. I'm still pretty high functioning, all things considered. And it's such a joy to be able to bring this perspective of whole person care to other humans who would benefit from it. And I'm so excited to share about it with all of you today.
Yeah, we feel very privileged to have you here. So thank you for sharing. It's incredible. So I think we should start at the beginning with just what is yoga therapy. I think when we all think of yoga therapy, we think of a yoga class, but I understand now that it is way more than that. So can you give us an explanation and how it differs from what we may perceive to be yoga therapy?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really fits beautifully into the Acclaim model of sort of not a one size fits all approach, because yoga
Mhm.
therapy fundamentally is an individualized whole body approach to better overall health. And it uses all of the tools in yoga, which I'll get into a little bit as we go through. But the practice is designed to meet an individual's specific physical health needs, mental health needs, emotional health needs, as well as their goals for themselves. So as a yoga therapist, I'm not walking into a space and telling someone what I think they should be doing with their minds and their bodies. It is for them to decide, and they are an active, involved, engaged participant in their path to wellness. So at no point am I dictating what is happening. And we use a combination of mind body practices to focus on all of these different aspects of health, because humans are whole people. I can't
Mhm.
just take out one part and just be like, oh, we're just going to focus on your shoulder because it's connected to everything else. And it might, their shoulders might be tense because work is stressful. And so, how do we alleviate work stress to enable them to feel better in their bodies so that the shoulder pain goes away? Or maybe it is, a mechanical injury from lifting something and putting it in the wrong place. And so the practice will do everything from movement to mindfulness to meditation. In some cases, it's a lot of deep relaxation and breathing to bring the nervous system back to a place where it's not constantly aggravated. And so, depending on what folks need, we might be relieving stress, we might be managing underlying conditions and symptoms, and all of this is integrated with whatever else their healthcare team has put together for them. So if they're working with a physiotherapist, I'm not going to build another practice on top of that because
Right.
who has time? But we will integrate breath work and visualization into the physiotherapy practice so that they get more value from the things that they're already doing.
Okay. Yeah, that's very interesting. It's interesting to hear how broad it is because as we know, a lot of cases can be super complex. So it's working alongside their therapy. Okay. Very interesting. So who would you find benefits most from yoga therapy?
Like, selfishly, I want to say everyone. But there are some groups that tend to benefit more. There is a physical nature to the practice. So folks like me who are living with chronic pain, whether that's from musculoskeletal disorder, repetitive strain injury, as someone with carpal tunnel in both wrists,
Mhm.
I can speak to this fairly intuitively now. But folks living with low back pain, arthritis, neck and shoulder pain, all of those things are fairly easy to address with the practice, whether we're building on what a physiotherapist has already put together or designing a movement plan independently of that. And on the mental health side, yoga therapy, there's plenty of research that indicates that it is very, very useful for folks living with anxiety, depression, any sort of trauma or post-traumatic experiences, as well as folks who are struggling with insomnia and burnout and other forms of sleep disorder that are impacting their mental capacity. It is also useful for non-communicable diseases. So folks living with diabetes, heart disease, in recovery from, or just post-cancer treatment. So depending on where folks are at, there are tools in the toolbox for all of those things as well. So it is, well, selfishly, I'd like to say everyone, but it is actually everyone.
I'm curious is when you're working with someone, you find out more things that you can address. during your
Mhm.
time with them?
Yeah, and it's always really fun for me to learn to sort of, as a therapist, I'm very tempted to be like, let's do the root cause work.
Yeah.
I was like, but is that actually what's causing you suffering in this moment? Because I can look at someone with my training and say, oh, okay, all of these things are linked back to this one condition. But if that's not where they want to work, that's not where we work. We work at the point of greatest suffering for the person in the moment. And then over time, as they're ready, if they want to work on the root cause issues, we will do that as well.
Do you ever find someone may not be the right fit when you're working with them?
Yes, and sometimes it's just me as a therapist, so it's not
Okay.
yoga therapy as a discipline. I We do a lot of guided meditation, and I've had people say, "I don't like your voice," which
Oh.
is fine. If you're not going to listen to the meditation that I record for you, I would rather you work with a provider whose voice you actually like and will listen to, so you'll do the practice.
I see.
Um, but I also have students who will come to me and say, you don't have lived experience with my condition, which is fair. I haven't lived through every possible thing. I don't know what it's like to recover from cancer, but I have a lot of colleagues who do. So in that instance, I will happily refer them to someone who has lived experience with their condition so that they can come at it not only from a place of compassion, but also a place of empathy.
Very nice. Okay, so once you've determined that someone's a good fit, what does treatment actually look like? How do you decide like what tools to use? And maybe I
That
can
is
transfer.
always a fun question. Um, and it really is a conversation. I like to say that we co-design practices as opposed to me designing a practice for someone. And so every conversation happens one-on-one. And there's always a front end piece around what it would take for folks to feel psychologically safer, because depending on their experiences in the broader healthcare system, they may never have felt listened to. They may not
Mm.
feel like someone took them seriously. And so there is some level setting there. We might do some nervous system regulation together before we start the conversation if they're feeling sort of tense or agitated. And then I will, in advance, review the documentation that Acclaim sends over. So I'm not asking them questions they've already answered, because everyone knows that frustration. I've already talked to 3 providers about this. Now I have to tell you the same story. So based on that review, I will ask them some questions. And then we do a movement assessment to see if movement is possible, if it feels safe, if it feels accessible. And we move through all of the joints, all of the planes of motion. Um, and once we've done that, then we have a conversation about goals. So in the short term, how would you like to feel? What would you like to address? In the medium term, what would be useful for you? And if we were to think long term, as
Mhm.
I offer you tools and empower you to take good care of yourself, what would be really helpful? And then based on that, we design the practice. Because if I'm seeing, a root cause thing, it's probably a long-term goal for that human. It might not be the immediate moment, this is what I want to tackle. So they get to decide where we work. And then based on that, we'll puzzle out movements that feel safe and accessible. We'll puzzle out form, technique, especially if there's joint injury or repetitive strain pieces happening. And we will integrate breath so that the nervous system stays regulated through the practice. So if they already have a physiotherapy practice, we'll go through those exercises. We might slow them down a lot to coordinate with breath so that they feel safe, they feel comfortable in that practice. In some cases, movement's not possible, in which case we might visualize doing the movement instead, which still builds those neural pathways, still supports capacity. There may be pain management practices, so that might be guided meditation, it might be visualization, it might be other breath work. So it really depends on the human that shows up. And then from there, we'll do the practice together at least once. They get a recording, they get a set of notes. They're always welcome to ask if things don't make sense once they take them home and try them in their own environments. And then we continue to meet and adapt the practice because people change, life changes, situations change.
Of course.
And so we continue to adapt the practice so it meets them where they are until they've achieved that goal, ideally.
Yeah. And I know that you've brought 3 case studies with you that we'll walk through and really bring this
Yes.
to life and go through them. But I think right now is a good place to stop and see if there's any questions. If anybody wanted to bring anything forth before Naya dives into a couple of examples. Yes,
I,
Christine.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry,
Hi,
Ange.
Naya.
No, no, go ahead. I should follow process here and put my hand up.
Hi, Naya. I did have a question. You were talking about the individualized plans for people.
Yeah.
How many times a week are you seeing that people should attend based on the standard? Like, is there a standard recovery period? I know you have a variety of conditions, that sort of thing. And the case studies will probably get into the successes of it. But what are you seeing? Is it 2 times a week or 3 times a week work best for people with chronic pain, for example?
It really depends on the human and their capacity, because the hardest part of this is I can't do the practice for you. Right? It would be
Mm-hmm.
magical if I could do someone's practice and they would feel better. And so, especially with folks who are struggling with a mental health condition, some of it is really just supporting the habit building. And so sometimes it is, 2 or 3 times a week so that they feel like they have support to do the practice. But for folks who are, you know, more on the physical pain side and are generally feeling mentally well, it's once a week, maybe once every other week, because they have the cognitive capacity to sort of hold themselves to account. And I do offer sort of accountability support outside of come and sit in a session with me, because that can be a bit time consuming for us to
Mm-hmm.
puzzle, when we can see each other. So I do have students who, after their practice, will just like text me a little emoji to say they're done, and I'll send them something that feels like a good dopamine hit. So for one of them, it's like a little cat video every time they do a practice. So they have incentive to keep going. And so it is really individualized depending on what would best support a human. So if they need more support to start to build that habit, it might be 2 or 3 times a week, but for some people it's every other week, because that's where, the adjustment is helpful or the consult is helpful.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
And do you still have a question?
I kind of have a bit of a comment, or maybe it will turn into a question. So some great information. I know that we were, or Nair, you're honing in a little bit at first on the pain, maybe can't post-cancer diabetes.
Mhm.
I guess my interest is in a little bit of your support when it comes to more of the mental health
Yeah.
conditions, right? And people bringing those psychosocial stressors to the mat
Mhm.
that might include things like work, family. I was just looking at, if we're going to be incorporating and talking a little bit about that, or is it
Mhm.
definitely the same type of treatment plan in a sense?
So again, sort of will depend on the individual, and we will get into the case study, so you'll see some
Okay.
examples here. But writ large, depending on how well folks are feeling, classically the approach in yoga therapy for folks who are dealing with anxiety and sort of a very noisy brain is to give them a really active practice that forces them to stay present in their bodies. So often there's a lot of balancing that we will do if that feels safe and comfortable, because it's really difficult to balance on one foot and run a laundry list in your head of 16 things that are happening. And so the practice is designed to keep them present, to invite them to observe what is happening sort of physically, proprioceptively, neuroceptively in the present moment, as opposed to forecasting a future and stressing about it. For folks who are on the flip side of that, sort of not feeling so great, whether it's full-blown depression or burnout or really low energy, the invitation there is not to lean into a deeper restorative practice, because there's already not enough activation in the body. So it is a more gentle practice, but still quite movement oriented to create a sense of energy. There we use more breath work as well to regulate the nervous system and bring it back to that level of stability. And so definitely lots of tools in the toolbox, but we may also integrate, time in nature. Nature prescribing has been proven to be really useful for both sets of those conditions. So, can you practice in front of a window in the winter? Can you get outside in the summertime or when the weather is appropriate, bare feet on the earth? Um, all of those things might show up in someone's practice depending on what feels accessible. And in some cases, it might not be a yoga practice. It might be, if you have a dog and you love walking your dog, could we add another walk? And could you walk mindfully and pay a lot of attention to the joy that you feel, or, those moments in nature that inspire awe? So the practice is quite adaptive. It's not always get on your mat and do this prescribed set of movements. It may be, if you like to garden and you have a community of gardeners that you engage with, could you engage with them more so that you can be in the present moment? And then maybe you do some journaling after and make note, ideally writing by hand, of the experiences that you're having that will reinforce the desire to continue having those experiences.
I like how it's called practice, because I think that's what it actually takes. It's repeating it and making sure that, it becomes part of your everyday, right? But I think this is a great spot to bring it to actual examples and show the benefit. So I'll let you walk through it, and then you can kind of speak about the challenge, the strategy, and then how you implemented a solution.
Yeah, for sure. So this was, I think, maybe one of my favorite Acclaim referrals. Not that I have favorites, but this was particularly rewarding. This very, very lovely lady was referred to me after a motor vehicle accident. So persistent neck and shoulder pain. And I think at that point she'd been seeing 3 different physiotherapists and had what felt like 100 exercises to do. And some of them were similar, but there was multiple sheets of paper floating around. She couldn't keep track of them. And so our first order of business was to really look at all of those practices and organize them into useful sets of movement. So we took those exercises, collated them into a set of seated practices, a set of standing practices, a set of reclining practices, so that she didn't feel overwhelmed and opt out of physio altogether, because she was just like, there's too many pieces of paper. I don't know what to do. I don't know what order to do them in. It's taking me 3 hours to do my
Overwhelming.
physio. Which I don't know anyone who has 3 hours to do physio in their life, while also, managing children and pets and generally being alive. So we broke it out into something that felt accessible and not overwhelming. So she actually started to do her physio more consistently. And then we integrated breath into that. And she loved singing. And so there were instances where she was like, I don't feel like I can move because the pain is more than is comfortable. And in that instance, I was like, okay, there's some self-massage you can do. And then a little bit of singing to improve capacity for breath, which also naturally tones the vagus nerve, so brings us back into a space of more stability. And she found if she did that, earlier in the day, later in the day, she did have more capacity to do her practice, which was really lovely. And so there was a lot of work with her physiotherapist. Her psychotherapist was also working with her on the sense of anxiety around movement at first, because there was so much pain. And so that was a really collaborative practice. At one point, her kids got involved, which was really lovely, because she was like, oh, I'm on the floor. They like being on the floor with me. So we do some of this practice together, which was really fun. Her dogs were also very involved, as pets often are. And so that was sort of the first stage of the practice, was to address just the physical limitations and the sense of overwhelm. And so her physiotherapists were very integrated in those conversations. And then as she prepared to return to work, since she had the accident while driving to work, there was a lot of anxiety about return to work and getting to the workplace. And so we puzzled out, if you were to visualize that drive, where is that moment of tension or pressure or anxiety coming in? Can you visualize driving that route safely and returning home safely? For 2 or 3 weeks before she started, and then a couple of weekends before she was ready to go back, she did that drive with her partner, so had the extra support, and was able to negotiate that successfully. She had breathwork practices to do in the car that we puzzled out together. She made a playlist of songs that would make her really happy and keep her just not distracted in like a distracted driving sense, but distracted from that sense of fear or anticipation of something bad happening. So she used those on her drive. At one point, we were integrating aromatherapy because she was curious about it. So to keep her focused on her drive as well, which was all really fun. And then when she got back to work, we didn't redesign, but worked with her physiotherapy team to puzzle out practices that she could do at the workplace as well, to continue to manage the neck and shoulder pain that had reduced significantly, but was still present, so she could stay in the workplace as opposed to feeling overwhelmed and having that pain return, which would then have removed her from that space. So lots of body awareness throughout, lots of active journaling, which she was really interested in doing, and making notes so that she had this full data set by the time she was ready to return. So she knew what would work in the moment for her.
Did you already speak on this slide? I'm sorry, I didn't push it through.
No, that's okay.
Okay.
I think this summarizes sort of the core pieces of the intervention. So, we took those, what felt like 100 physiotherapy exercises, and made 3 neat sets, and then pulled from those her favorites for when she returned to the office that her physiotherapist still agreed with. And by that point, she was stronger. So we'd gone from movement, integrating bands and adding resistance, to keep her well in her space, but also adapted it for the fact that, she wasn't able to lie down where she was working. So what could we do? Seated, standing, against a wall, and in other ways. And the sequences got shorter because she didn't have a half-hour break. She had a 10-minute break. So what can we do in 10 minutes that would still keep her safe and well? And the same way the breath practices changed from sort of longer, more focused practices to shorter ones that she could do, in 30 seconds to 2 minutes to be able to, manage big feelings if they came up in the moment. I'm pretty sure she's still singing when she's driving, which makes my heart really happy, because she's able to do something that felt really, really scary. Um, and, to be able to live life in a way that feels good for her. And then the other piece, isn't always part of practice, but for some people, self-massage can be really soothing. Self-touch can be a really lovely way to ground into the body. And so she does have a regular self-massage practice to tone the vagus nerve and bring her back to her space. And so she is happily returned to work, delightfully productive, really enjoying being back with her team last time I spoke with her, and quite confident in her drive now, which makes me really happy because I know how debilitating that can be when you can't get to the places you need to get to without a whole support team behind you.
Yeah, I really like this example because, when you speak of a case on its own, it's not just about the chronic pain that she's experiencing. It was, in fact, something more, the complexity of that case, where it was a fear of driving. And so you work through that step. So it's not always, a return to work date, but it's the journey to get there and what steps you can take so that they can return to their, best and healthy selves. So I really like that example. Thanks for sharing, Naya.
Yeah, and I love with this one, like how well integrated we were. So it wasn't just me. Her physiotherapists were involved, her psychotherapists, her friends are involved, her family is involved, her dogs are part of it. So it is very much not just me and a human being. It's the universe comes together to support this, which was so fun.
Thank you. Okay. Any questions before we move on to her second example? Okay. All right, Naya, walk us through this one.
So again, another, like, these are all favorites because they were such great humans and it's such a joy to be able to support them. Um, so lovely, lovely paramedic, early 40s, was referred to me because of neck and back pain, but was dealing with really significant burnout that I'm not sure she was able to articulate to herself until we were partway through. Um, and so we started initially just working through physical pain. And as we continued to have conversations, I was like, oh, you're not going to bed until 3 in the morning and you're not up before 2 in the afternoon. So we should probably talk about sleep because that's impacting a bunch of things. And by that point, we were 4 or 5 weeks in, we built enough trust that we could start to have that conversation, and a lot of other things emerged. In terms of, change in marital relationship, change in relationship with children. And so we puzzled through those pieces, but we started very much working with the physical body. Um, and she did have a physiotherapist, but when I first spoke with her, she said, oh, there are notes, but I've moved 3 times and I can't find them and I can't be bothered to go look for them either. So I was like, okay, good to know that that was not something that you felt was helpful. Um, and she was working at that point with a psychiatrist and with a psychotherapist as well. So I received those notes in advance, sort of reviewed them, had a sense of, what the complications from the medication could have been, particularly as it related to her sleep. And so we puzzled out how to move forward with that. But the first step really was pain relief for the neck and back injuries. So gentle movement, she was quite open to sort of a short, like a 5-minute practice 3 or 4 times a day to relieve stress because she was also moving houses and had no issues, at least physically, sort of hauling things and tearing out furniture and, tearing down walls, which I was like, but your neck hurts and your back hurts? Tell me more about why these things are okay for you to be doing.
Right.
At one point, she was digging trenches, and I was just like, I'm not sure you understand how these pieces are related to each other. So let's figure out some body awareness for you so that you can find a place to pause in these movements, or as you are doing these things, relieve some of the physical stress that is building. And so that was a big part of the initial practice, was just coming back to the body, becoming aware of what was happening. So we weren't going to do more injury to a system that was already quite tense. And I did collaborate with not her physiotherapist because she couldn't find her notes, but with a colleague of mine to puzzle out what would have been appropriate, and then integrated breath and body awareness into those practices so that she had something that felt comfortable and was short enough that she could do it when she paused between some of this like very intensive physical movement. I taught her how to breathe properly, which was it sounds like a weird thing to teach someone, but is sometimes quite necessary to remind people that we don't breathe using all of our accessory muscles. This is not where breath is supposed to happen. And she was quite sort of aware of the body generally, just not hers. So to remind her, this is where your diaphragm is, and can you breathe into the bottom of your rib cage instead of the top of it for a while, was really useful. And so then to integrate that, we did a lot of meditation, both for deeper relaxation during the day because she was fatigued, but then also to help her fall asleep earlier. So instead of it being 3 in the morning situation, we got closer to midnight. So she was sleeping more through the night that better aligned her circadian rhythm, which then supported her digestion, which supported her energy, which helped relieve some of those burnout symptoms that she was experiencing, because sometimes it really is just about resetting that circadian clock. So that was really useful. I think she's still using the guided meditations because she has her set of recordings to keep. And since she was dealing with some sort of family breakdown, invited her to connect with other family members who were quite supportive. She ended up moving in with her parents for a little while to sort of lean into that support and that community, to support her recovery, which was quite helpful. And she did eventually start a journaling practice to puzzle out, where perhaps boundaries had been pushed or dissolved that would not have been helpful, and where she might want to start restoring some of those. So on the whole, better mood, better digestion, better energy, which I was really happy to hear, and significantly reduced pain levels, despite, moving, and it sounded like at one point she was building a house from the ground up. So despite all of that, maintained capacity for movement in a way that was fairly pain-free.
Amazing. Burnout is a real serious thing. It's not just related to work. It can be, all external things that you may be dealing with. What did you find that was most beneficial for her? Was it the breath work? Did you
It
find
was
that
the
made the biggest difference?
breathwork and the guided meditation. She really took to it. And so there were sessions where it was just like she would be lying on the floor in a comfortable position, her body was very well supported. And I would be guiding meditation for half an hour. So it was not, an active, let's do some sun salutations, let's do some movement. I was like, your system is quite aggravated. We don't need more movement. You might be moving more than is useful for you. So let's find a place where you feel safe resting. Because I think at some point that had not felt safe for her. And so to be able to do that sort of with the care of someone who's keeping an eye on things, making sure nothing bad was going to happen remotely, which is also fun to do, to be sitting in 2 different cities and being able to do that was quite powerful.
Are you still working with her? Like once they've returned to work and they're seeing progression, do you check in every, you know, month, quarterly, yearly? Like how do you stay connected with these, with your patients?
I do check in, and there have been instances where they've said, I'd like a little bit more support, and then it's a conversation with Acclaim or, whoever else is involved to see what we can do to continue to maintain that recovery.
It's wonderful. Okay. And we have one more example, so I'll let you walk through this one.
Yeah, so this one was also complex and quite a lovely human to work with, and more mental health focused than movement focused. So they did not present with a bunch of physical pain. It was very much struggles to sleep, chronic depression, lots of anxiety. And so similarly, received the notes from Acclaim, did a really thorough review. And then it was a conversation around what would be most helpful for you. Because we can work with all of these things, but where is the point of greatest suffering right now, as opposed to me deciding we should, deal with your anxiety first.
Right.
And they identified sleep as sort of the first place that they wanted to work because it was impacting all of the other things. And sleep is, we know this, it's critically important. And yet it's like, oh, I could sleep an hour less and do these, 6 things that need to happen. And so that was the place that we started to work. And it was a lot of active relaxation because there's a lot of held tension in the body that wasn't causing pain, but that was making it difficult to sleep. So not only to fall asleep, but to stay asleep. And so there's lots of guided meditation, lots of breath work, just find a place where rest was possible. And in instances where actual sleep wasn't happening, we have a practice called Yoga Nidra, which translates to yogic sleep. And it is a very deep awareness practice. So you're not supposed to fall asleep when you do the practice, though many people do, and that's great if it helps them get there. But it takes you through a full body scan and then an awareness of sort of thoughts that are arising. There's an invitation to set an intention of how, when you finish the practice, how you would like to feel and how you would like to move through your day. And so it is quite restful to experience. It doesn't replace sleep. It's not you do this practice for 30 minutes and it's the equivalent of a nap. I wish that were possible. We haven't puzzled out how to do that yet. But it does create a deeper sense of rest physically and physiologically. So folks are able to move through the rest of their day with a little bit more focus and a little bit more ease. And so that was a practice that they really took to feel more rested, even if sleep was not accessible. And then over time, as the nervous system shifted out of that fight flight state, sleep became more accessible. So they went from sleeping 3 hours to 5 hours, eventually to 7 hours, which for me is a huge win, because once that's happening, all of the other systems are coming back online. The brain is actually physically better able to clear metabolites, cardiovascular system is able to function better. And then once they were feeling physically better, so as we were approaching more accessible sleep, we then added a really structured active movement practice to create, one, a sense of tiredness that would support sleep, but also to manage that constant noise that comes from being anxious. So all of that sort of future focused piece. And so movement was quite lovely. By that point, they'd learned to breathe properly as well. So it was more accessible to do that sort of long, slow, smooth, soft breathing as they were moving through this very structured, counted practice. For folks living with anxiety, often I'll invite them to, as they do a movement. So, if you're taking your arms up over your head and your breath count is 6 seconds, to count to 6. So not only are you focused on the sensation, your brain has something else to do as opposed to think about whatever calamity you're anticipating. So that was really, really helpful. Lots of guided meditation recordings, again, to support sleep. And this was one where that, send me proof that you've done your practice, whether it's an emoji or whatever, and I'll send you something that is rewarding, was really helpful to build and maintain that practice. And then the other pieces here was a lot of family and community support. So folks who would practice with them, also lots of getting outside, because this was something that they really enjoyed. So getting outside, engaging with the environment, seeking support from community. They love to dance. So they went back to dancing, found a really strong community at their dance studio, and I think eventually ended up working there part-time as a way to contribute to that community, stay really connected. And focus on something that was really positive for them.
Amazing.
So it was a really fun one.
Oh, very interesting. Thank you for sharing. It's interesting to hear about all 3 examples and how they differ so much. Like we talked about at the beginning of the call, there are so many different things that can happen alongside traditional therapy, and it's about bringing them all together and seeing what fits. So it must be very fun working with these people, Naya, and seeing the results like that. That's incredible. I'd love to open it up to the floor to see if anyone had any more questions, or if they had anything specific for Naya for their own practices. I feel like that would be amazing if they had any questions. I know I have a lot of questions, Naya. I'm going to email you on this.
Yes, please do.
I will for sure. Would anybody like to come off mute? Okay. Perfect. We have 20 minutes to spare. Naya, I'd like to thank you again for your time today. If any questions come up after this call, please feel to email me directly, and I work with Naya in getting those answers to your questions. If you had any questions about more about our mental health ecosystem and how we can connect with any employers that might be interested, and if you're seeing an increase in mental health cases, again, reach out to me directly. But I hope everyone has a very good rest of your day, and thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me. It was such a gift to be here.
Naya, they were great examples. Thanks so much for sharing those. Yeah, really insightful.
Thanks for all the referrals.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you so much.